says now streaming live on my computer.
Okay, I'm just going to go to our YouTube and confirm. Somebody just is in the waiting room if David or them in.
I don't see anybody in the waiting room. Oh, there it is, Mike. We're all present, counted for.
Hey, John.
I see it now.
You see it on the.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the April 6th Beaverton School Board work session. We are going to start off this morning with our superintendent, Don Grotting.
Thank you, board. I'm glad to be seeing your faces, even if it's in this view. I've missed seeing you. And I just want to start off before we start having some of our presentations that you truly have a great cabinet leadership team here, as well as all of our teachers and everything through this pandemic crisis. We've never been prepared for anything like this, and people have really stepped up to the plate, all the way from feeding our students to handing out devices to providing the instruction and all in the operational operations part of it. I think you'll hear from Carl and Josh Gomez about some of the work that they've been doing and on the instructional side. Also, I want you to know that the state of Oregon has sent people up on the instruction side, and they've been actually mirroring a little bit for the state plan, a lot of what we've been doing. So everybody's working hard. We are falling down and skinning our knees once in a while, but we get back up and we're trying to really do what's best for our students. We're continually on the phone with the governor's office, with the Department of Education, and with our county health department weekly as they update us on everything. From how are we going to graduate seniors to the number of certified cases that we've had in Washington County, the number of deaths that we're incurring, some of the latest strategies to ensure that you're sheltering in place. We're doing this every day and things constantly change, so trying to keep you updated. And then really just want to thank the board for your staying in touch with us, providing us information as you hear from our community, and it allows us to get ahead of some of that stuff. So we've been our communications department led by Maureen. We've really been trying to stay in contact with our community. So that's just a brief update. I think you're going to have a lot of more direct questions answered today in our presentations, but thank you for the board that you are. And I think that we're going to come through this and we're going to be stronger. So thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Grotting. Appreciate that. And thank you, board members, for joining us all from your safe locations at home. And with that, we're our first Zoom meeting, and we'll do the best we can. And all of us are new normal. I know most of us are using these with our professional. So with that, we're going to start off with a COVID-19 update of what's going on around the district. And we'll first hear from Josh and Carl.
Good morning, Becky. We've got Carl Mead that's going to start us off here.
Good morning, everyone. All right, this is Carl Mead, Deputy Superintendent for Operations and Support Services, for the record. Just want to give you a little bit of background, a little bit more detail than what we provided in the situation sheet. As you saw in that document, this began, our current state, shall we say, began with the governor's order back on March 17th. And there were 5 conditions for us that were put into place for us to continue to function and operate and ultimately be able to continue payment or pay towards our employees through this situation. So prior to that, though, we had convened a pandemic team starting way back to, it feels like way back now, to March 2nd, so beginning of last month. There was approximately 25 colleagues throughout the district representing all departments that came together each morning, and initially thinking we would meet for about an hour to an hour and a half. Sometimes we were actually meeting up to 3 hours to convene that group. And the intent of it was to be able to address any questions that may be coming forward from our schools, from our staff, and from our community. And remember back then, and again, not that long ago, but remember several weeks ago, we didn't have a lot of guidance. There wasn't guidance coming out of ODE, out of the governor's office or the sort. We were just beginning to hear of implications of practice that was happening up in Washington and various other places around the nation, but nothing in essence standardized across our own state. So we were trying to deal with situations as they were coming up. People were asking questions. Oh, I was exposed to X, Y, Z. We were working in very close communication with the county health and their EOC, which was established, I believe, later that first week. And that was a huge resource for us to be able to run questions by them. We had our district nurses who were part of the pandemic team being able to address these questions. And we would field anywhere between, I think the lowest point, and this was the very beginning, maybe 10 or 12 questions. It got upwards of to 50 to 60 questions on a daily basis that people were asking of us, of which then we were turning around and providing written documentation so that it was there for reference and for others to be able to take a look at. We then took those messages and created 3 sequences. We had specific messaging that went out to administrators so that they knew what action they needed to do, what information that was included in that information that was also provided to our community. So 3 levels of communication: administrative, we had a staff communication on a daily basis, and one also for our community. At times somewhat repetitive, but again, trying to emphasize the importance of the safety and precautions that we were taking as a school district to be able to keep our children safe. At that point, we still had nearly 40,000 students attending on a daily basis. We were running buses throughout the district. We had implemented some practices for our bus drivers. We had extended their morning shift by 15 minutes and their afternoon shift by 15 minutes to be able to do a full wipe down of their buses. Seats, railings, and all those types of things. So they took those responsibilities on at the same time, and Josh will address this a little bit later, some of the actions that were happening at the school level with our custodial staff. But before we do that, I know there's going to be questions that come up. I will go through various pieces of this information here. Josh will click over to Josh, and then I'll come back, and final piece I'll be sharing with you today is about Chromebook distribution before Jenny then takes over. Maybe after Josh and I finish with the operations side, that might be a good time for questions, Becky, by the board at that point. So continuing on here, meal service was a primary target of the governor's order. And so we were able to begin that the week prior to spring break. That week we served a little over 13,199 meals that first week of operation. That's in 15 sites. We had 15 actually brick and mortar sites that people needed to come to pick up a meal for that time. The week following, which was just last week, the week following spring break, we served 18,364 meals. So we increased that by nearly 5,100 meals in just a week's time of practice. At the same time, we went from 15 brick and mortar locations to 17. And we also increased distribution through bus routes. Now, it's still not a perfect system. We're continuing to improve. We've got some push points that we need to really take a look at in the very far north of the district and in the south end of the district, where those are not typically summer food sites. And that's where these places, this is where our food locations are being situated at the present time. So we are trying to take a look at that. What modifications do we need to make to ensure that all students have access to meals throughout the district? So that's continuing to evolve. We're working with charity on that, as well as transportation. We are staffing our buses. We have our nutrition services staff who are doing our brick and mortar distribution and preparation. In terms of bus service around the district to various stops, obviously we had our bus drivers who have volunteered to come back. They're being paid obviously during this time, but we had approximately 60 bus drivers volunteer to do these runs on a daily basis. And we had nearly 170 staff, certified and classified staff, volunteer to distribute these meals. So they too are also going on the buses to be able to distribute, place at curbs, and being able to distance appropriately, social distancing throughout this entire action. So again, huge kudos to our staff overall, who are taking on additional responsibilities, things that they're not used to doing, but wanting to be able to touch base with kids and be able to help support our community in that way. So that's primarily the area or primary focus for meal service right now. We'll continue to evaluate and potentially expand that. I would foresee us continuing to expand meals by several thousands each week as this continues to go forward. Part of this is word of mouth, location, and the sort. And these meals are not just a lunch meal. We're providing a breakfast and a lunch in one package for students. And again, this is from ages 1 to 18. And you do not necessarily need to be a student of the Beaverton School District to gain access to it. The next piece of this is in terms of the grab and go lunches, the meals, is making sure that we've got enough product. And that's certainly, we're hearing that. Don and I and David heard this the other day in terms of a conversation that's happening statewide. There's some food shortages in various areas of the state. Fortunately, we're not in that situation now. We're ahead of our ordering, making sure we're on that so that we can continue to provide nutritious meals to our students. So got a lot of kids who are very happy in being able to access this, and we're very pleased about that. Josh, if you want to go ahead and move forward with daycares.
Yes, good morning. Josh Gottman, Chief Facilities Officer. With the daycare programs, we have private daycare providers who we used previously, and we have 2 providers right now that are operating at Cooper Mountain and at Terra Linda. The priority, this is a governor priority, the priority for children in those daycare programs are centered around our frontline emergency workers, the first responders, and the healthcare professionals, but the service is also available to previous BSD families who are registered in that program. The numbers have been low here over since March 16th, but we are working with our daycare providers to communicate out to the community. The service is available, and they are reaching out. We are reaching out to the families on our website to let it be known that that service is available. I know that at Providence St. Vincent, they do have their own daycares that they're providing. So I think that's kind of attributed to the numbers being low. But I think here in the coming weeks, we expect the numbers to increase as we move forward. So we're continuing to support that. The daycares are operating out of our cafeterias, and if they have to expand, they will expand out into the gym and to other classrooms as needed. For custodial and maintenance, I'll talk about that quickly. It's not in your situation report, but our focus in custodial has been primarily to the meal service and the daycare programs. So as the daycares operate during the day, their hours are from 7:30 in the morning to 5:30 in the afternoon. Our custodial staff is coming in afterwards from 5:30 to 7:30 in the evening and following up with cleaning bathrooms, cleaning the cafeterias, and taking care of those items. The meal service that Carl talked about, we have 17 sites. They're typically operating in the morning from 6 to about noon to about 12:30. Our custodians are coming after that, doing cleanup for that and taking care of that. We have about 1/3 of our custodians that are working every day, and they're not only supporting the daycares and the grab and go meal service, but they're also doing daily security checks on our buildings. So they're looking at if there's been any vandalism. Obviously they're unoccupied, so there's not a whole lot of cleaning going on, but checking mechanical systems, checking our boilers, and looking for pests and other things. It's also an opportunity to look at putting in work orders that need to be done. So that's happening right now today. Tom, I know you had a question about PPE, and I'll wait till we get to the end to cover about that and talk about it. Also, this time from a maintenance and custodial side, we're looking at an opportunity for energy savings. We know the buildings are unoccupied, so we have lowered our building temps to about 55 degrees. That allows for to maintain some energy savings during this time. We've also shortened our garbage service right now, so that obviously we're not collecting a lot of trash. So we're getting some savings there. Moving on to donated supplies. So over spring break, good news story is that we provided some gloves and N95 masks to the VA Portland Medical Center in Providence, St. Vincent. And the numbers are in the situation report. You can see that we donated over 1,000 boxes of the exam gloves and over 2,000 N95 masks, which is great. Custodians collected them at the schools. They collected the masks specifically from emergency preparedness buckets that we had in the classrooms, and the gloves were collected from our health rooms. We did not tap into our custodial supply because we know the supplies are needed to continue to do our work. But with those available supplies, health rooms, and in those buckets, we're able to collect them across the schools, get them into our central office, and then distribute them out to those 2 locations. A lot of work there that week, but it was a lot of good work. Carl, back to you for the Chromebook.
Sure. So, over spring break, Steve Langford and his team did an outstanding job of soliciting information from our community of what the need was. As you know, we distribute Chromebooks to our students in grades 6 through 12, and students have access to a Chromebook in grades 4 or 5 access, but that's not typically travels to and from home. So trying to address the need for the governor's order and recommended and the work of ODE is that has shifted from just supplemental to moving forward with instruction over the coming days. We knew that we had a gap there between kindergarten and 5th grade. So to resolve that, we needed to make sure we had tools put in into our kids' hands, and those specifically being Chromebooks. Doesn't mean that every student in the district needs them. Many parents have those resources at home and they have access, but we're also seeing families where that's strained because they're working from home. They need their computer for work. They can't relinquish it to their child to engage in school. So last week was the first week of distribution of Chromebooks to kids in kindergarten through 5th grade, distributed approximately 4,900 Chromebooks in round 1. We knew that this would not resolve the issue across the district. The second piece of this in round 2 is, again, word of mouth. People may not have gotten the information, been able to register for a Chromebook online. And so round 2 is going to be happening here very shortly. And we expect to have anywhere between probably close to 5,000 additional Chromebooks distributed in that fashion. So Chromebooks are being registered in a student's name, and they're being provided a new password rather than to our standard issuing of passwords that we typically do at school. And then a set of directions have been provided to students as well, students and parents, as those instructions are being delivered to in English as well. I believe in Spanish. I don't believe we translated into our other languages. We may have, but those are the 2 primary languages we translated instructions to. Those distributions have gone incredibly well, incredibly well. Our first site was Bethany Elementary last week. Just as a test site, we did 1 school in the morning to see how it would go. Steve and team did an outstanding job. And then one of our greatest needs was over to Loa Huber. Again, that went incredibly well. There's a news story done on that one. And just you saw the distribution happening very seamlessly, and staff fully engaged and actually practicing, as we should, social distancing throughout this entire distribution. So in addition to that, we have got a help desk that's open not only to staff, but also to students. And they are incredibly busy, as this is some new information for parents and for kids, especially in our primary grades. How do you function with a Chromebook? How do I do this, do that, so on and so forth. So they're online, they're being able to answer questions, take phone calls, and be able to address those needs and concerns throughout the district. So Josh and I could probably talk for a good hour and a half to 2 hours of the work that's happened over the last month, but we've got a lot of other priorities, as I feel like we have made a huge shift from an operational side of things to answering questions of the unknown, to making a shift of this is a new reality, and into programming and what school needs to look like here in the near future. So Josh and I are happy to take any questions you may have.
So I'll start with the question from Tom. Tom, if you don't mind, I'm going to jump in with that. So I received a question from Tom Collette about additional PPE required for COVID-19 cleaning. We follow the guidelines from the CDC, and in there, CDC is very specific. If you have a confirmed case in a facility, you are going to wear at a minimum gloves and a gown. Since we've had one case of a confirmed positive case within the district, but that notification the notification happened a week after. So we continued on with our PPE, the protective equipment that we wear based on the disinfectant, which is nothing more than typically gloves and safety glasses if you need that. So Tom, to answer your question, nothing further than what the disinfectant has required in the safety sheet, just because of the fact that the notification is lagged beyond that. Even gowns are recommended, but they're not required. You could still wear your normal clothing, and they just recommend that you wash it afterwards.
I see we've got a question submitted by Donna, and her question is, are you providing hotspots to students without internet service? Great question, and thank you for asking. I forgot to include this information. We are gathering information where hotspots are needed. Some of the things that are happening, as in major providers have actually opened up the internet. They are eliminating kind of it's unlimited now, shall we say, for users across anybody who has cell phone service. The other piece of this is trying to teach our parents and kids what a hotspot is and how you can actually utilize that as well. So that will also potentially assist many of our families. The other part of this is trying to gather, as I said, information of who needs a hotspot. We're trying to acquire those. Steve's team is moving forward with that to acquire those hotspots so that we can resolve that need. But ultimately, yes, we want to be able to provide access. We don't want to have kids have to relocate as they typically do to gain access. Many of our kids have depended upon commercial environments to be able to gain access, such as a Starbucks or a McDonald's of the sort. With many of those closed up, that internet service is also closed down. We're also hearing stories of neighbors who are opening up their own Wi-Fi of their own homes to expand so that their neighbors potentially have access to their Wi-Fi in this time. Anne, do you have a question?
I do. I'm curious, first of all, I'm so heartened to know that we're doing so many things to make sure that we are getting out the tools and the food that our students need. And I'm sure, Carl, with the free internet access, I'm assuming when we give out the Chromebooks, we're also given the instructions for how to, get access to whichever provider might be close to their homes. And I guess the other question I have is how, it's sort of an existential one. How do we know that we're meeting the need, with the number of meals? How do you assess how far in the south of the district to go? How many more places we need to be providing food, that we are getting out enough information? Are we just watching it? And how do we assess, I guess is really what I'm looking for.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a world of the unknown right now because we have our summer experience, and summer experience of distribution of meals is a very different course of action. And so what we're seeing and what we're monitoring right now is we're seeing a daily increase. Every single day, we're continuing to see our numbers increase. Charity and the team are tracking those numbers. She and I were talking last week. We'll be meeting again this afternoon to assess that. Where is it that we need to potentially go? So for example, in the north, we're looking at potentially opening up Springville, which would not be a typical summer meals site, but it would be close access to a number of students who are free and reduced, who are part of the Rock Creek community, because their closest location happens to be Sunset High School. Doesn't make a lot of sense. So trying to open up some other sites throughout. The other issue that we have is down on the south end of the district happens to be Becky's zone. Not a single school down there has been identified within her zone. So we are looking at that. Mountainside technically could qualify because Mountain View is designated to attend that school. The difficulty with that is access to that school for walking is not recommended, especially for kids in the elementary level. High schoolers, middle schoolers, it's appropriate, but for elementary kids to walk and gain access to meals, so it would be more of a drive-up service. So we're taking a look at what kind of bus stop service we might be able to provide in the south end of the district over there, because the closest school for service over there happens to be Southridge. So again, not convenient for that end. So we're monitoring, we're adjusting, and we're taking a look at this every day. We're not going to wait 3 weeks out. We're making adjustments based on just information from last week going into this week. If we're able to make some additional bus stop services, we're looking by the end of the week, adding those. and adding those lines and making sure we've got the volunteers to distribute.
Okay, and I just have one quick follow-up. I know you said that you were getting our orders in without any problem. Are we getting any insight from our suppliers that they're projecting shipment delays or any, I know that there's sort of this crisis mentality out there about who's open or not, but I'm hoping that our suppliers are not impacted.
Our suppliers in the metro area, they're doing fine. And actually the benefit we also have, because we're a large enough school district, is that we have somebody who does their primary job their only job is to do the food ordering across the district. So he is continuing to do that. He's monitoring that. So we've got our supplies for several weeks to come. And so he's just continuing to shelve new product as it's coming in.
Any other questions from board members? With that, thank you, Carl and Josh, for that great update. And please thank your staffs. We know how much extra work and all the thought process, and that you're trying to do well by our students and our families. So we really appreciate the extra effort and the hard work that everybody's put in.
And Becky, may I offer one other piece? And I should have included this in terms of food service, because it's not just our grab and go meals. We have a lot of faith partners who are actually stepping up and providing meals or food boxes, for supplemental food boxes for families in multiple areas of the school district. So that's also continuing. We're opening our schools for that, obviously, again, social distancing in the fact. So those volunteers are continuing as well.
Thank you for mentioning that, Carl. We're the we and collaboration. We do know what a strong community we have in Beaverton and the greater Beaverton area, and we're fortunate to have all those partners with us to provide meals. So with that, we will turn to Jenny Hansman to give us an update on our distance learning for all.
Okay, good morning. I'm Jenny Hansman, Deputy Superintendent of Teaching and Learning. And teaching and learning had a huge task ahead of us when all of this started. So as you saw, I believe in the situation page, plus some information I have given you, there are 3 phases to this remote learning. And BSD has tried to get together and make sure that we have everything in order for that. So I'm going to go through each one of those phases so that your understanding comes from the changes that have taken place throughout the last few weeks, and how our department and district have decided to kind of move forward with them. The first phase, as you remember, launched on March 16th, which was really basic. It was intended to limit learning loss and maintain student involvement with learning resources during that initial 10-day closure. And this did not require any help from our teachers. It did not require any materials or action. It was just there to help parents maneuver this time during their kids. Phase 2 was introduced as soon as the governor came out with their guidelines. And there was a big difference between phase 1 and phase 2. And that difference meant that teachers were now to facilitate learning opportunities, provide formative feedback, and connect with students on a regular basis. So as soon as that order came, and it happened to be right at the beginning of spring break, our team got together with all of our TOSAs in our department. We're talking secondary, elementary, and making sure that our teachers were prepared for that change. That required a lot of communication with our principals and administrators. So as soon as our CIAs, administrators, came out with curriculum instruction and assessment from all of the work that we'd done, then our executive administrators took those resources to our principals and preloaded them prior to information going out to our teachers to make sure that our administrators were on board, that they understood the resources and what their teachers were being asked to do. And they had many Zoom conferences with their administrators prior to starting with phase 2. Phase 2 started last week, basically, with our teachers using professional resources that our TOSAs had developed in terms of that entire week. So we wanted to make sure they had enough time to access the information, understand the information, and really feel prepared to be ready for this week. So that took a lot of planning up front, but it also took a lot of communication with, like I said, our principals as well. They had staff meetings that helped work with their teachers so that they knew how to Zoom, they knew how to use some of the remote learning activities. All of those were done last week. I have a teacher in the family that kind of showed me her vision along the way. And last week, the teachers really took on a huge amount of learning and really tested kind of the way that they've taught and transformed how they're teaching. So today was the launch of phase 2. And with that came our teachers connecting with students, our teaching our students, providing feedback to them, which is pretty darn exciting. Last week, we got more information from the Deputy Superintendent of the ODE, Colt Gill, and he publicly stated that there is a strong possibility that we could remain closed for the duration of the school year. Phase 3 planning, when we began that last week, really assumes a long-term closure. Should schools reopen in the meantime, the Teaching and Learning Department will provide guidance and support to transition back to an in-person education. But for right now, we're looking at a long-term closure with the planning that we're doing for phase 3. So right now, our teachers are in phase 2. Our principals are helping direct them in phase 2, and we're getting prepared to move into phase 3. Now, because, as you know, that was pretty new information for us. We have had people working all weekend and last Thursday and Friday to make sure that we are prepared to move our teachers into phase 3. Phase 3 includes some shifts. As I stated with phase 2, they were to connect with teachers, they were to give learning opportunities. It was mostly supplemental learning opportunities. But the shift then transformed into a distance learning for all. And what that meant is that phase 3 includes learning tasks are to be specifically aligned to BSD courses and include new content. Learning tasks can be assessed in a summative manner. And so there will be evidence of proficiency of learning targets. Credit will be issued at the high school level. In addition, accommodations and modifications to curriculum instruction and assessment must be made for special education students. So as you can see, from phase 2 to phase 3, there was a significant shift in what we are now asked to give our students. And because our team felt prepared and ready to take this on, because we in phase 2 were very connected to the state. So much of what we shared, all of those resources were shared with ODE. So a lot of what their guidelines and requirements were based on BSD's model. So a lot of what we were already doing really well. So it just needed to include these shifts. So as of today, those shifts have been in process. We have not launched phase 3 yet. That will happen on Wednesday. Wednesday, communication will go out to our staff and they will go out to our community at that time. We wanted to give significant amount of time this week to make sure our teachers were feeling comfortable, they were ready to interact with their kids and be ready for the shift coming next week, because it is pretty quick turnaround. And so all of this, as you can imagine, takes a lot of collaboration. with our association, with our cabinet, with making sure that we're moving in the right direction and that everybody's on board with it. So we are calling it now phase 3, distance learning for all. And our team has developed, as they did in phase 2, a significant amount of resources and guidance to help teachers teach phase 3. Phase 3, as set by ODE, is set to start on Monday, April 13th. With that, for secondary, we are pretty much on our way to making sure that happens. And with elementary, we are as well, although elementary is going to take a lot of resources to make sure we're up and running, which I'll explain in a minute. So they are going to kind of go on a staggered start next week, but full implementation from everyone will be occurring next week of phase 3. Which has required a lot of shifts to scheduling in terms of, for secondary, it's required us to take a look at middle school schedules, high school schedules, give direct guidance to teachers on how that will go forward. And in terms of elementary, the big shift is from supplemental resource materials to taking our current curriculum and our current standards and our current targets, same for secondary, and providing resources for our teachers to be able to teach remotely from their homes beginning on April 13th. As you can tell, that this is a very big lift to make sure that people are feeling comfortable. I can't tell you how many emails and thoughts I've been getting from teachers along the way of their excitement to be able to connect with their kids. This week, there's a whole lot of excitement going on with teachers connecting with students and really feeling excited about that. Now, all of this has significant challenges, as you know. This is called distance learning for all, which means every child needs to have a Chromebook, be on board with their families, and be able to take this on. So it is with our help and the teachers' help to make sure that happened. For example, last night I mentioned my daughter, but she's given me a bird's eye view. She's at Beaver Acres, and so many of her kids in her third grade classroom do not have Chromebooks because they didn't see the notice of the Chromebooks going out last week. So she's working with her team and making sure that before this week started, that she had her kids on board, her parents on board, ready to get started in this work. Because it's a family affair, not just a student to teacher. So especially when it comes to kindergarten and first graders, the families really need to be on board. Now, we have provided, we haven't shared this out yet, but on Wednesday, when it goes out to the community, I will be CCing the school board to make sure you have the resources and guidelines with to know really what's being asked of our teachers and support the plan. We know that this is not a perfect plan, and we know that we are going to make mistakes along the way. This fast timeline makes it certain that we're going to have to take feedback along the way. So each one of these steps, Kayla with the elementary, Brian with the middle and high school, are doing constant feedback with our teachers all week and our administrators to make sure that we are giving just a lot of customer service when it comes to making sure everybody's on board. And lastly, I just want to thank everybody that's been involved in the planning of it. It's allowed communication and collaboration to be at its finest, even though it is remote. But it takes a village to make this happen. And with the support of cabinet and everything that had Carl and Josh talked about to begin with, so that we were in a prime place to be able to start and launch this. Our team has this feeling of we've got this, we know we've got this, but we also know we're going to make mistakes along the way. So with that, I'll leave room for questions for you and anything else that you would like more detail on.
Okay. Tom, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Thanks for the report, Jenny, and thanks for your hard work and the many other staff and administrators that are working through these difficult and quick changes. I'm wondering how we're tracking family participation, not just at the school level, but at the greater level, and what kind of layers we have in place to reach out to families as this situation moves forward.
So as of right now, along with the planning, the teachers are asked to make connections with families. So, and if that becomes a problem, they can reach out to their counselors, their student success coaches. A lot of our teachers are doing the groundwork on this. So there's a lot of other people that don't have the big lift. So they're there to offer the support and guidance along with our TOSAs to be able to make sure we are connecting with families and trying and making sure that no family is left behind and every teacher has connected with every family. And as
Okay. Susan, you have a question?
You need to unmute, I think.
Yeah, I was having problems with my computer. I didn't mean to stop video. All right. So the question is, special needs children and whether it's, an impacted, highly impacted child or, kids that are pulled out for resources. How is that being handled?
So Danielle and her team are on that, and it's taking a lot of lift from her team as well. So, but what I know and what they have done in phase 2 as well is making sure that we follow the guidelines that are given to us by the state and make sure that we are looking at accommodations and modifications with online learning. The nature of shifting it, and I'm looking at some of the pieces, it takes some direct instruction from special ed to make sure that that is happening. And she has a document that you can't see, but I'm opening up right now, but it's all about how the purpose of it is to provide guidance and support to teachers as they do their accommodations and modifications. So they will receive training and receive a lot of instruction on how to make that happen. It's going to be a big lift for those, but the planning and presenting of that, for example, if you're doing reading, you're looking at visual supports, virtual check-ins, opportunities for repetition. So the document outlines all of the things that they may need to use with their specialized instruction and be able to teach teachers and make sure that they can do that same instruction remotely. So it's taking what teachers have normally done in the classroom and teaching them how to do it remotely with those students. That's just the start. There's a lot of guidelines along with it.
Thanks. Donna, I believe you have a question.
Yes, first of all, I'd like to commend you on all your hard work and all this effort. This has been quick and you guys have certainly risen to the challenge. It's truly a monumental task. And I know that I have gotten some inquiries already with parents that are concerned about graduation. Kids are concerned about graduation. And this might be too early to ask because you're working on everything else in addition to this. So maybe if you could just, I'm sure that you're still working through a plan, but just provides a little bit of insights, maybe to alleviate some concerns of parents and students. That's kind of what my question is.
Right. I may ask Don to chip in right here because he has been working. And so the information I have is kind of confidential. So I'm not sure what he needs to or would like to share with that. Don?
Yeah, so thanks. Great question, Donna. And I think a couple weeks ago, everybody was shooting towards looking at reducing the number of credits. So in the state of Oregon, to graduate, 24 credits are required. And they were talking about floating an idea out there about taking that down to 19 for seniors this year. And that's the way that we were headed. What I can tell you is I think they may shift from that mentality. I can't tell you exactly what that shift is, but we're supposed to know by tomorrow. But it probably will not be reducing the number of credits, and it'll go a different way, but it will provide some significant opportunity for our current seniors to be able to graduate where they're not being penalized. I just can't put it out here on this live stream right now because it's confidential, but hopefully we're going to get some word by tomorrow because we and the rest of the school districts we really need to know that who those students are. And more so, who are those students that may be in jeopardy of not graduating so we can start providing some interventions and opportunities for them to be able to get the criteria so that they have the opportunity to graduate. But as soon as I'm able to, I'll get that out, Donna. Great questions. Superintendents, I've had lots of questions from students and or parents involving that. And right now, our IT department has been working on identifying exactly where do we sit, where do each of our students sit right now in relationship to graduation and what their status is. So, but I think more to come. If I can find out and share that tonight, I'll make sure and get it out to board members.
Don, I believe Ann has a follow-up question, and then we'll get to Tom's question.
Great.
Don, I was wondering, and it sounds like you've alluded to this a little bit, but I've received email and from the public around how is Beaverton contributing to the conversations around how we're implementing practice and also around timelines of school closures and the conversations around graduation. I'm just wondering if you could illuminate a little bit about the role Beaverton's playing in trying to make sure that we're doing the right things for all of the kids of Oregon.
Great. So I'm probably on the phone daily with the Department of Education and the governor's office. And they're looking towards Beaverton and some of our larger districts, as well as some other remote districts, just because of where they're at and whatnot. And they're really, and in fact, I will just say that the Department of Education actually sent a team up to interact with our teaching and learning team and our technology folks as we develop distance learning. So a lot of what you're seeing, some of the requirements in the distance learning are trademarks of what Beaverton is doing. So having constant conversation with Colt Gill and their leadership team and making recommendations regarding graduation requirements specifically, as well as credits. But remember, it's just not these seniors that are losing content material for the rest of the year. It's also, we're going to have students coming back now next year, and they're going to have gaps by not going over and showing proficiency in standards that they've missed out on. So we're going to have to start planning for next year as these students come back. How are we going to fill in those gaps, identify what those critical standards are as we move forward? But I think initially our primary right now is, and people are really worried about this all the way from parents to seniors. We do not want to, in looking through our equity lens, we don't want to penalize some of our students and especially some of our most vulnerable students as they go forward. What I can tell you, yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm in constant daily. I was on the phone last night. I was on the phone last night with Colt Gill. He called us, he called me, and as I said, they're thinking about going, they're devising a different plan for seniors. And he reached out to me specifically, and he wanted to run his idea by me. And then in turn, I was able to get on the phone last night with several teaching and learning folks, and they're really trying to take our input in, as are some other districts, but Beaverton's definitely a leader in this area. And I guess what I can say, I guess on live video is, if you look around at some other states on what they're trying to do with their seniors, in some states, they're reducing the number of credits. In other states, what they're doing is looking at when a specific state stopped and they went into a no more school taking place, they're evaluating where those students were at that specific time, and then possibly being able to use that progress and that GPA, and that would determine whether or not if they're going to get credit. And then districts are able to shift from those students. They can continue to learn, they can continue to go on, but really shift resources to those students who were not up to progress at that date, if that makes sense. So those are two different ways of thinking, and I see lots of smiles on the screen right now. So those are two different ways of evaluating how seniors are going to graduate.
Thanks,
Okay.
Don. I trust that if you need support from the board, you'll let us know.
Yes, thank you, yes, and I think that as we go forward, and we're going to need that, because I know that school boards are particularly interested right now in our seniors, how they're going to graduate. And just along that line, right now, as you can imagine, there's a lot of heartbroken seniors thinking that I don't get to walk across that stage, I don't get to get that diploma. We're going to have to wait to see if that in fact is the case, but we also have a teaching and learning team, I know right now, trying to figure out how can we make this important to these students and or their parents. So if somebody has a great idea out there, if we're unable to collectively gather in a specific location, we're just really trying to think of things, because this only comes by once in a lifetime. I know my daughter just got a letter yesterday, UNLV is not graduating. Graduation is canceled, and but I think a high school graduation has a lot more emphasis and impact, and it's their first big event in their lives. I think it's a big event as they go into their next life. So I know those kids and their parents are out there trying to figure out ways that we're able to celebrate a great event in their lives.
Okay, Tom, I believe you've got a question, and then Donna has a follow-up question for Dawn. So Tom?
I think, Don, you answered most of it, but what I'm trying to understand is, what is our goal with distance learning for all, especially in terms of maybe our students who aren't graduating, but our students who are matriculating upwards. What are we looking to achieve in terms of their learning experience here, and how ready they're going to be for next year, and how much remedial material may be required to make that transition?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, number one is making sure everybody's safe. And the other thing I think that we're really, and Jenny can chime in here if she wants to, I think our first the first thing we want to do is that engagement, and it's building that relationship and letting those students know that we're still here for them. We're here in a different way, but we're here to be able to support them as they go forward. And then I think what our teaching and learning team is doing is trying to figure out what are those critical standards that have not been covered yet throughout the year, and knowing that we're not going to show proficiency in all the standards that are left, but trying to really focus on, some people call them the power standards, where I think we're starting to call them, what are those critical standards out there that are left? How do we cover that? How do we probably trying to look through an equity lens, especially for our most vulnerable students. And when I talk about this, I'm talking about some of our special education students, our emerging language learner students. How are we going to be able to give them what they need as we go forward? And then I think at the end of the year, I think there's going to be a lot of work for us in the summer to say, okay, where do we think our kids landed? How are we going to start school next year? Because that could alter a lot of the scope and sequence of our curriculum as we get ready to go forward. I don't know if I'm answering your question, or Jenny, is there some, do you want to land in?
Well, I think you said it really well. And really, it is about connecting with students first and foremost, make sure they're healthy and safe. Also, making sure that we can have as much teaching occur as possible in a remote situation. And we don't want a learning loss. We want to make sure they're prepared and ready for what comes in the fall. And really, that's the prime. And to know that that their health and safety is really important. We're doing a lot around the social emotional learning with making sure that that is in the schedule for pre-K through 12, making sure that that social emotional piece is attached to that as well, along with trying to teach to as many targets as we can within that period of time. So.
Before I get off here, I just want to let everybody know I'm really not being rude. It looks like I'm on my phone. I am actually on my phone, but it's with Coke Gill. They've called kind of an emergency meeting, and everybody's wanting to know where Beaverton is. And I'm telling him that basically I'm in a board meeting. So anyway.
Okay, well, Don, hold on just a second, because Donna has a follow-up question for you.
Okay.
Yeah, hopefully this is a quick one. I get inquiries from parents who are wondering if there's going to be some sort of forum, because they have lots of questions and they're trying to figure out how to get them answered. So is it a question that I should direct them to their principal, or is it something that we were considering, like maybe opening up our website and having people post questions and then the district can respond? I'm just trying to figure out, I wonder if you guys have thought about that, but I've just been getting inquiries with that.
I think I can, go ahead, Don.
Oh, I was going to say, great question. And I'll let Jenny cover it on it. Two things. I think something that wasn't brought up on the whole distance learning thing, Steve Langford and his crew, they have actually a help desk ticket, and they have people that'll go on, walk people how to get on their computers, take them through it. They can even manipulate some of their computers and help parents and students with that. And then I'll let Jenny talk about, I know that we have a process, okay, as we start into this distance learning, a way to get feedback from, I think trying to find a way to get feedback from not only our parents, students, but also our staff. I'll let you go, Jenny, and then if you don't cover, or if you're covering your question, Donna, I'll let you hit us again.
Right. We're right now developing a feedback loop with our teachers, but most importantly, our families. As soon as that goes out on Wednesday, our team is working with community involvement and trying to have our website have a place where any parent can go and ask questions and give feedback to what we're doing, and so that we can relay that back to our team and see what changes can be made. So that's in process, and it should be something that we definitely want by next week up and running so that we can provide feedback.
Did that answer your question, Donna, or?
Yes, it did. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay, Susan, you had a question?
Yeah, so my question is a fiscal question as well as, if this would ever happen. So is there the potential of extending the school year because of loss of time? I realize that there would be impact to the budget.
I think right now, I think there's a potential, but I believe right now, just because of several extenuating circumstances, one would be the budget, that right now, I don't see that movement to extend the school year at this time. I believe we were supposed to go up till, I believe, June 13th, if I'm right. And so going beyond that, with knowing what's coming down on the budget, I would believe it would, and you'll hear some of that. I don't think it would be wise financially, as well as we are under contract with, our collective bargaining agreements. And once we started the days, actually, we've only missed, I think, 4 or 5 days that we actually shut down. So there's contractual issues and a whole bunch of other things going on there, Susan.
All right, does board have any other questions of Jenny or Dawn on? Well, Jenny, just thank your staff. We know that you worked unbelievably hard during spring break. I know our families have lots and lots of questions because this has direct impact on their students. They're afraid, they don't know what this means. But at the same time, when I think about how many times we have had to pivot in the last 2-3 weeks, we've responded to what the state has required, and still what our families need, and getting this remote. And it won't be easy, and we thank our teachers and the support and the balance that everyone is trying to do. And I think there's a lot to be said that we're all in this together as a state and as a district. And Jenny, we thank you and your teaching and learning staff for being so proactive in trying to do what is best for and most meaningful for our kids. So with that, we're going to change topics here and get a budget update from Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Mike Schofield, Associate Superintendent of Business Services. Appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit of kind of where we are financially, try to paint the picture of where we are with this year, what we have to look forward to. And if we could go to the next slide, I'll kind of cover all those topics. So we'll deal with our 1920 budget. We'll talk a little bit about the 2020-2021 budget process and timeline. We'll dive into the COVID-19 impacts, what we know, what we're doing now, and what we need to know. And then we'll talk about next steps. Basically in 1920, you'll see our projected general fund ending balance at 31.9 million. That is up from what I've shared with you in prior months. So, and that has no impact from COVID-19. It's just where we are. We've got additional revenue coming in from the state school fund. And we're estimating a little bit less spending as of the end of March. So more to come on COVID-19. We've also implemented spending and hiring restrictions. So the spending restriction went out on March 19th, and hiring restrictions are now coming into place where Cabinet will be reviewing postings in the future. For 2020-2021, the budget document is nearly complete. It's built on the most recent state school fund estimate, which you have a typo there. I think it's February 25th was when we got that recent update. It includes the new staffing allocation model. It includes a student investment account, the SIA of 32.7 million. And at this time, our timeline remains the same. So by law, we have to have a budget in place prior to July 1. So we're advertised, and we will have our budget committee meeting on April 20th. We've got a follow-up scheduled on May 4th and May 18th. And then you as a board will hold your budget hearing on June 15th. And it's very likely the budget you adopt won't be implemented in the fall of 2020. And that's simply due to the timing of information we need to make decisions. And I'll get into that a little bit more as we move through the presentation here. COVID-19 impact. So what do we know? We're in an unprecedented time. We know that our proposed 2020-2021 budget will be negatively impacted. We know there are record unemployment claims in the state of Oregon. I think the number through March 28 is 178,000 people have applied. Our unemployment rate has gone from 3.5% in February to 4.4% in just the month of March. So and I believe the state economist looks at jobs as primarily how the general fund of the state of Oregon will be impacted. So we know we're not in a good place. The state of Oregon, though, is in a better financial position than they've been in the last couple of recessions. When you think back to 2008, or even prior to that in 2002, the state the cupboards were pretty bare going into those recessions. This time around, the state does have some resources that they put away in the Ed Stability Fund, the Rainy Day Fund, and just what their fund balance was projected to be at their last estimate. So what are we doing now? We've got emergency spending required due to the governor's order, including meal service and daycare. That's not a significant impact on our budget other than we're providing it, right? We've got the waivers to be able to serve the meals. We're able to run buses, and we'll be able to count those in our transportation grant. And we're providing the facilities for the daycare, including custodial and those kinds of things. Emergency spending required to implement distance learning. We've got some of that going on now in the technology area. I think we'll have some more as we go down the road, but I think it's too early to tell exactly how much we'll have in spending there. But more to come on that as well. Again, those spending and hiring restrictions are in place. And we're currently analyzing cost containment measures in all departments for the rest of the school year. So when Josh talks about, lowering the temp to 55 degrees, altering and changing and reducing our trash pickup, those are the kinds of things we're doing now to try to save money as we go into next year. Okay, here's what we need to know. And this is probably the biggest, unknown of where we're at, but we want to know what the Federal CARES Act, what the impact is on our state. How much relief are we going to get? How much relief is the state going to get in general? And how much will come directly to schools? We don't know that now. We know that folks at the Department of Ed are going through it and trying to determine. And in addition to that, they're looking at other things like in our title funding, can we have unlimited carryover, or for maintenance of effort, where do we need to be on that? Are we going to get a grace on maintenance of effort for the 1920 school year? So there's a lot of, they're looking through those documents now and looking through the impacts to see what they need to do to give us guidance moving forward. So that's our first piece. Our next piece that it's going to be very important is the initial impact on state revenue. The state of Oregon, the state economists will provide their forecast on May 20th. That'll be their next update. That is going to be a very telling situation for us in terms of where we are as a state in terms of personal income tax collection and the impact on the state general fund. So that will come on May 20th. My guess is shortly thereafter, the legislature will be called into a special session. If this recession behaves like the previous two, what happens is you wait for that revenue forecast, you get it, and then the legislature comes into session to balance the budget. So what we need to know again financially is, one, what the federal impact is, two, what's going on with our state personal income tax collections and corporate income tax collections, and three, what's the legislative response going to be? How much of the reserves that they have will they allocate, and what that might look like? Next slide. Our next steps. So we're going to have to internally identify and prioritize potential reductions. We'll get to work on that here quickly. And we need to clearly communicate our financial dilemma and uncertainty with all the bargaining groups and constituents. So, you know, we're going to, it's going to be somewhat confusing, and I want to be careful with our community and our staff that as we roll out a budget on April 20th, again, that's to meet our timelines. That's to get a budget adopted. What we actually will implement, we likely won't know until, you know, late May or June, what the impact is on K-12 and more specifically our school district. I've also asked principals to create spending plans to identify and review all required spending for the remainder of this year. So we are doing all we can to limit spending for the rest of this year because we know that we're certainly going to need it in the coming year. Your questions?
Anne, why don't you go ahead and start?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. My question is around, you know, and you alluded to the fact that we will likely be passing a budget, you know, well before we have actual information from the state about what our disbursements will look like. I'm wondering if there's been conversation about that amplification with state income tax being delayed in terms of when it's being, and what the flow of dollars to us, how that impacts us, or if it does, or if it mostly is just a planning impact?
So from a cash flow perspective, again, I think the state's in a better position in terms of collections that they've made and establishing their rainy day fund or funds. In addition to that, I know that the state has the ability to do some short-term borrowing if they need to, and they may need to do that for this year, but I've heard nothing yet about any reduction in dollars sent for the current fiscal year.
Leanne, you had a question?
Thanks, Mike, for that presentation. That is a good overview and helpful to know. I just wanted to ask, it's maybe a specific question about the budget process. One, have we been in contact with our budget committee members? And two, with the 3 meetings that are scheduled, will those be similar to this in terms of a Zoom meeting? What's planned for that?
So that's a great question, Lance. So what we're doing is we kind of wanted to get through this meeting today to see how instructive it would be for our April 20th meeting. So this will be helpful in terms of as we debrief about how the meeting went. I think that this type of meeting is what we'll use for the April 20th meeting. Moving into May, we'll see what the restrictions are at that point. We in our advertisement, we posted that we would take comment in writing and that we would gather that information. I think the cutoff is the Friday before the meeting. And so if anybody wants to comment on it, we'll have some way of getting some input in our first meeting through written comment. And again, as we move forward, depending on the restrictions, that'll kind of dictate how our meetings will be held moving forward. And we will reach out to our budget committee to make sure we get them up to speed with how to deal with Zoom and make sure we've got all the technology in place so folks can participate.
Tom, you had a question?
Yeah, I have kind of more of a comment. So I think going into the next fiscal year, our community was expecting it was going to be an ads budget, especially with the new SIA funds. And with the very, very real possibility this could have an extremely adverse effect on our budget into the next year and maybe even beyond. How are we going to be communicating with our community to ensure that people understand the new reality and how that extends to the school's budget and the possibility that there's going to be some very difficult decisions to make in the coming months and years?
Good question, Tom. So what we'll do is as we kick off our budget process on April 20th, we will have some specific comments around COVID-19 about the uncertainty of revenue and what our likely revenue picture may look like after May 20th. We won't speculate, but of course we'll have some discussion about the drastic difference compared to the budget that we're presenting with our likely outcome in June, July, and August. So we will communicate it initially in April, and then we'll just need to keep communicating. And once we really know the impact, or at least the initial impact, after the May forecast and after the legislature meets, then we'll have a full court press in terms of what we think that means to Beaverton. I would also let you know that last go round, the May forecast was not the end. So we're going to get a forecast in May that's going to say and the legislature will respond to that by balancing the budget. If it goes like past sessions, the next forecast would be, I think it's September 24th. And depending on where the numbers are then, the legislature may need to meet again. So this could be an ongoing issue for us moving forward. So we just stay tuned and make sure we're letting folks know what the potential impacts are.
Just a quick follow up on that too. Ensuring that there's opportunity for people to know where to advocate. Because I know that our legislature is going to have to make some difficult decisions, and the folks at the federal level, I'm guessing there's going to be more to come. And so if we can help plug people in who are concerned about what these impacts might look for the school district ahead of those decisions being made, that would be wonderful.
Excellent. Thank you.
So Anne, you had a question?
Yeah, Mike, I'm curious about whether the budget you'll be presenting, how it's including or being structured to include the Student Success Act funds, and if anything has changed since our last planning meetings on this.
We will include it as planned and as you approved at your last meeting. So it'll be included in that way. Again, as we hear what happens with the corporate activity tax, if they decide to delay it in some way, shape, or form, or if the likely outcome of the collections aren't as robust, we'll have to make changes from there. But what you will see in the proposed budget is the full allocation. And remember, what you're doing is you're appropriating dollars at the end of the day through your budget hearing, and you're imposing taxes. Those are all those legal hurdles that we'll get through. But how we actually budget and look like, or what we look like in terms of program in the fall, will probably happen in June and July.
Thanks, Mike.
Eric, you had a question?
Yeah, I think maybe Mike might have answered it, but it's really like on the collections on the side of the taxes for the SSA program. So I think you mentioned it, but it's still kind of nebulous whether it's going to go in effect right away. So we really can't bank on those things unless you know more than I know right now.
Don't know anything more, Eric. Thanks. That's why we've done the hiring restriction. We're not hiring any more of the SIA positions at this point because of all the uncertainty around what the collections might actually be. And remember, a big chunk of our SIA included maintaining the class sizes we have. So that's a significant piece of it around class size.
Thank you.
Mike, I have a quick question. You mentioned a hiring freeze, but at the same time, kind of what Anne alluded to, you're still saying that we're moving forward on the SIA, and I know a lot of the student funds were going to be used for hiring. So we're not going to do any hiring then?
So at this point, what we're doing is we're hiring on a case-by-case basis. No postings are going out until cabinet's had a look at them. So again, we're moving forward with the budgeted dollars for SIA, but not necessarily all the programming around it until we get some more certainty after that May forecast and after the legislature meets. Does that make sense?
Yes. And also, Mike, can you also maybe share with the board the Zoom meeting that you had with Senator Haas?
Yeah. So we had a conversation with Senator Ass last week, and he's certainly close to where things are on the revenue side, and a lot of uncertainty. I asked specifically if he saw it playing out similar to the way it has in past recessions, where again, the legislature doesn't meet till the forecast comes out, then they take care of things. He agreed that the impact on the economy could be very severe initially. The question will be how quickly we come out of it. And a lot of that will depend on what we see in terms of just in our state and nationally, how quick we get back to business. So he had some insight there, discussed the SIA and, the strong possibility again of reduced collections there.
So he didn't mention anything about the commercial activities tax. That would take the whole legislature. That wouldn't just be the revenue committee or the governor. That would take the whole legislature on making any changes to that commercial activities tax. Right. So, he mentioned specifically that could be an outcome. An outcome could be to delay it, but he wasn't sure which way the political wind was blowing at that point. That maybe that would be a tool, but not the tool they use at the legislature. Maybe they would do something else to provide relief instead of delaying that tax. Don, do you have any other insight from the Oregon Department of Education? You're on mute, Don.
Sorry, just I think some board members brought it up about the messaging and how do we begin getting this messaging out that we are going to be coming into some severe financial times. And so I know that some of the larger districts with the forecast 5, they've been looking at what would a $1 billion general fund shortfall look like? What is a $2 billion? What does a $3 billion look like? And we've been kind of pushing on the Department of Education and Revenue Department that we at least give us something. $1 billion for Beaverton. That's approximately a $25 million hit to us that we would be looking at if they proportioned out education's hit on that. That's what we'd be looking at, would be about a $25 million hit. I think at Portland Public, they're looking at in around $30 million. So when you start talking about taking a $1 billion or a $2 billion or up to a $3 billion shortfall hit, you're talking about some pretty devastating things happening in education and school districts. At 25, and I think the senator also talked about, right now we have about a $1.9 billion rainy day fund, but that's just not for education. That's our entire state. And I think the senator did say that and talked about to not think that they're going to dip into that probably in this very first year, because it wouldn't be the first year that we'd really be worried about it. It would be that next biennium that's coming to us. I know I see Tom shaking his head there. We've talked about this. And so I just hope that people think we have this rainy day fund. It's going to be the savior for us all. That is not going to be the case. And it's not going to be the case that all of those funds are going to be directed strictly at K-12 education. So, when you start thinking about if we have to go through a $25-30 million reduction, you only get to that type of reduction by one thing, and that's staffing. And so any of the money that we can save right now will help save jobs. We're trying to communicate that with our bargaining units. And I think a little bit later, you'll probably hear something from Sue, but, you know, trying to work together. This is unprecedented times. And, you know, every time you start looking at those unemployment requests going up, it's pretty devastating. And we have businesses going out of business right now that we were counting on them for some of that cat tax. And I think we're in for some pretty troubled waters here before we get out of them.
Susan, you had a question?
My comment is, I know that before the SIA, we were in the whole 13, I mean, we are in the whole $13 million for next year. I know that we have some savings. I'm just wondering what we're potentially looking at in terms of being in the hole to, you know, to look at in terms of, okay, we have potentially 25 million, but what are we looking at being behind by in addition to the 25 million?
So Susan, that's the complicated piece of this. So our 2020, 2021 budget, as will be presented, is a balanced budget and the deficit is eliminated. But part of that is through SIA, right? That's part of how we eliminated our deficit. Moving forward from there, when Don talks about $1 billion, each $1 billion proportionally is about 25 million to us. That's pre anything else happening. So that's pre money from the CARES Act, Federal CARES Act. That's pre anything the legislature might do in a special session to backfill. So I think it's just early, Susan, to really assess what those impacts might be, because again, we don't know what actions will be taken.
Any other questions? Well, Mike, we thank you and your team. Know there's a lot of moving pieces and you're getting information from a lot of different areas, but we appreciate, and again, this is one of the most critical things the board is responsible for is the fiduciary responsibility and financial health of the district. And so the board is here to assist, and we look forward to meeting with the budget, being part of the budget committee come April 20th. All right, with that, we're going to move on to action items. And the first action item is accepting the superintendent's emergency declaration and approving an exemption from the competitive bidding requirements. This is in response to the governor's executive order. This is just an action item that we as a board need to take as a body. Are there any questions about the resolution? Okay, with that, Leanne?
Okay, I don't have any questions, but I just a concern. It looks like, and not surprising with online meetings, but we've lost Leanne.
Text her.
So I think just for the chair to consider whether we wait for her to rejoin or if you want to proceed, but you should be aware.
Thank you. Thank you for making me aware, because I was not aware. So thank you. We will, does everybody have the resolution in front of them? The recommendation?
Just one second.
Anne,
I had it yesterday.
I know it needs to be read in a certain way. So just one second. I read it carefully and I did not have any questions. So let me just pull it up.
is there? Well, there it is. Thank you, David. So Leanne is mentioning to me that she is frozen and she's
Thanks,
lost the
David.
audio too. Has anybody else got that problem?
No.
Not for me.
Okay. All right, Anne,
Yeah, so I move that the school board, acting as the local contract review board, will accept the superintendent's declaration of an emergency and approve the exemption from the competitive. Okay. David's having trouble too. Competitive bidding requirements of the contracts anticipated to be required in responding to the emergency.
I second.
all right, it's been properly moved by Ann Bryan and seconded by Donna Tyner. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right, with that, I'm going to call the roll of the board members who can respond. And I need you, when I call your name, to just tell me if it's if you're voting aye or nay. Ann Bryan,
Aye.
Tom Collette,
Aye.
Susan Greenberg.
Aye.
I don't think Leanne can hear us. Okay, Donna Tyner,
Aye.
Vice Chair Simpson,
Aye.
and Chair Timchak votes aye. With that, the resolution passes 6-0. Anne, can you make a following motion for us on the consent?
I move that we accept adopt the consent agenda. Approve? Is it approved?
I second.
It's been properly moved and seconded that we accept the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? With that, we'll do a roll call vote again. Ann Bryan,
Aye.
Tom Collette,
Aye.
Susan Greenberg,
Aye.
Leanne Larson, Donna Tyner,
Aye.
Vice Chair Simpson,
Aye.
Chair Timchak votes aye. The motion passes 6-0 that we accept the consent agenda. With that, our work session is finished. We will be meeting again for our regular board meeting on April 27th. We'll be letting our public know how that meeting will be working. Most likely it will be on Zoom again, but we will be working on how we can get public comment into the public record. And so we'll be letting the public know through our various areas of communication how we will be working that meeting. I thank all of you for your patience. I thank the staff. We're all learning here. We all need to give each other grace to understand the circumstances that we're in. The most important thing is that our community is safe and healthy, and that we continue to do the very important business that we're responsible for in the Beaverton School District. And I think our staff has shown that going above and beyond. And we thank everyone for being a part of the meeting, the work session today. And with that, we are adjourned.